Hi, you're watching Reddit Confessions. Let me tell you how I ended a 12-year marriage with one quiet gesture and a paper napkin. The entire place smelled like citrus and freshly wiped wood polish. One of those restaurants where the waiters talk like they're auditioning for a film and everyone pretends they aren't eavesdropping. I had never been there before. She had, 3 times apparently, but never with me. I walked in exactly 3 minutes past 5. The hostess asked if I had a reservation. I said no, but my wife does. Her smile wavered for a fraction of a second. I wasn't sure if it was sympathy or recognition. Didn't matter. I already knew what I was going to do. I didn't storm in. No drama. No accusations. I didn't even raise my voice. I just walked over to the corner booth, the one with the velvet cushions and the smug laughter echoing off the wine glasses, and I stood there, watching her not notice me. Her back was toward the entrance. His face was the first thing I saw. The way he leaned in, elbows on the table like he owned the night. He saw me, blinked once, and then looked right back at her, like I was just part of the furniture. She was giggling. One of those soft, breathy laughs she hadn't used at home in years. I didn't say her name. I didn't need to. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my wedding ring, and placed it on the table between them. It landed with a soft clink against the porcelain plate and rolled toward the edge, like it wanted to leave, too. She froze. He didn't. Then, without looking at either of them, I slid a folded napkin across the table. Inside it was a receipt, not from the restaurant. From the motel 2 miles away. The one where they'd booked room 204 last Friday. Time-stamped. Her name on the reservation. I stepped back. Still not a word spoken. Then he laughed. Not loudly. Just enough to twist the silence. She looked up at me with a face I didn't recognize. Not because she looked guilty, but because she didn't. She said nothing. So I did. I looked at him, then back at her, and finally said, "You always hated velvet cushions." Then I turned and walked out. That was the beginning of the unraveling. Because what happened after I walked away wasn't silence. It wasn't apologies. It was a cascade of confessions from people I thought were on my side, and the discovery of something that had been happening for far, far longer than I ever imagined. And it all started with one ring, one napkin, and a smirk I'll never forget. The moment I stepped outside the restaurant, the air hit different. Colder, sharper, like even the atmosphere wanted me gone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just walked across the street to my car like a man who had left something behind, but wasn't sure what part of himself it was yet. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at the rearview mirror. Not to look at myself. I couldn't even do that, but just watching the door, waiting to see if she would come running. She didn't. Instead, a waiter brought out their food. I drove home in silence, didn't turn the radio on. Even the sound of the blinker felt too loud. At red lights, I kept rubbing the empty spot on my finger like the ring might still be there, hidden under guilt. When I got back to the house, her shoes were still by the door. Her sweater was draped over the back of the chair. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be, which somehow made it worse. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor in the hallway like a forgotten suitcase, staring at the photos on the wall. Our wedding. Her birthday last year. That trip to Colorado where we laughed so hard in the snow that she fell backwards and cracked her phone screen. These little frozen lies framed and hung like trophies. I wanted to tear them down, but instead, I whispered why. To each one, like they owed me answers. Around 2:14 a.m., her key turned in the lock. She stepped in like nothing had happened. Like we hadn't just ended in public under chandeliers and wine breath. She looked at me and blinked, same blink as always, the one she used when she was about to lie. Then she said, "Clancy, I can explain." I remember how flat her voice sounded. No panic, no rush, just bored almost. She walked past me, straight into the kitchen, and poured herself a glass of water like we were going to talk about dinner plans. I didn't follow. I waited until she sat down at the table. And that's when I saw something that kicked the last sliver of hope out of my chest. Her ring. It was gone. Not in her pocket. Not around her neck. Gone. That band I bought 12 years ago from a secondhand jeweler, the one she said was modest and perfect. She hadn't just removed it in the moment. She'd taken it off before she even met him that night. She sipped her water and looked up at me like she was waiting for me to do something stupid. I asked one question. Just one. Who else knows? That's when her eyes shifted. Just a twitch. A flinch. And I knew. There were others. Not just lovers, no? People. Friends. Maybe even family. People who smiled in my face while knowing I was the punchline in a joke I never asked to be part of. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she said the thing that finally broke me. I didn't think you'd notice. That's it. Not sorry. Not I made a mistake. Just an admission that I was so invisible in her life now. She assumed I'd keep fading away. I stood there, still as a photograph, while she finished her water and walked past me again, this time heading to the bedroom. Our bedroom. And when I finally found the courage to speak again, my voice cracked like old vinyl. You can keep the bed. She didn't even turn around. But the story wasn't over. Not even close. Because 2 days later, someone sent me an envelope. No return address. Inside were photos, some new, some old, and a letter that changed everything. Not just about her, but about what I really meant to some of the people I thought were my friends. And suddenly, the restaurant wasn't the worst moment. Not by a long shot. I didn't touch the envelope for nearly an hour. It sat on my kitchen counter like a threat dressed in plain white. No return address. No markings. Just my name, printed neatly in block letters. Not handwritten, not typed, but labeled like a file someone had been waiting to hand me. I don't know why, but even before I opened it, I felt something crawl up the back of my neck. Like whatever was inside didn't just matter, it knew me. When I finally peeled the flap back, the first thing that slid out was a photograph. It was folded down the middle like someone had stared at it too many times before deciding to share. I opened it, and everything in my body stopped. It was Darla, at a lake I didn't recognize. She was laughing, not the polite kind of smile she faked at work events, but the belly-deep kind she used to save just for me. Only it wasn't me holding her hand. It was him, the same man from the restaurant. But it was the date scrawled on the back in pen that made me sit down. May 17th. That was our anniversary. I wanted to believe it was a cruel coincidence. A mistake. But the second photo buried that hope. It showed them sitting with a group of people at a campfire, wine glasses in hand, heads tilted back in synchronized laughter. One of the people at that fire? My coworker, Kevin. I recognized his awful checkered flannel and his thinning hairline. He and I had lunch just a week ago. He asked how things were at home. I told him I thought things were getting better. He nodded, smiled, and said, "Sometimes you just gotta ride the wave, man." The wave. I didn't realize then it was a riptide pulling me under. There were more photos. 8 in total. Different places. Different clothes. Same pair of people, tangled up in what I thought was still mine. And behind every image, more dates. Some of them from months ago. Others from last year. They weren't recent. They were ongoing. But the last item in the envelope wasn't a photo. It was a letter. Folded 3 times, written in black ink. The first line still burns in my head. She told me you were too soft to find out. I stopped breathing. Read that line again. Then again. The letter wasn't signed. But whoever wrote it knew things. Personal details only someone in the circle would know. It talked about how long the affair had gone on. It mentioned the passwords she used to delete messages. It referenced trips she took for work that weren't work. It even described the way she used to make fun of me when she thought I was asleep. How she once mimicked my snoring during dinner just to make everyone laugh. And then came the part that made my hands go numb. If you really want to understand, ask her about Cora. Cora? I reread the name over and over. It didn't ring any bells. No friends, no coworkers, no family members that I knew of. Just a name. But the way it was written, underlined twice, I knew it wasn't casual. It was deliberate. A buried landmine waiting to go off. That night, Darla didn't come home. No message. No call. Nothing. Just another absence, like a missing piece of a puzzle I never agreed to play. So I stayed up and made a list. A real list. Of everyone who might have known. Kevin. Her cousin Allie, who always dodged eye contact lately. My friend Jace, who once said, "You're too trusting for your own good." I'd laughed at the time. Now I wondered if he was warning me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even sit still. I kept walking from room to room like answers might be hiding in the furniture. I even opened the closet and stared at her clothes, wondering which ones she wore when she was with him. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was logistical. Calculated. Scheduled between real estate clients and dinner with her sister. But I wasn't just broken anymore. I was alert. I was awake in a way I hadn't been in years. The name Cora echoed like a bell in my head. Who was she? Why would someone risk revealing all this just to leave me with that name? And most terrifying of all, what if Cora wasn't a person? What if she was a secret? It's strange how the mind replays things once the illusion shatters. Ordinary memories suddenly carry clues you missed, body language that made sense then but feels sinister now, glances that lingered too long, laughter that covered too much. I kept hearing that name, Cora, every time I blinked, every time my phone buzzed. I couldn't figure it out, but I knew it mattered. And the harder I searched my memory, the more one specific night clawed its way back into focus. It was Darla's birthday, just 5 months ago. She had told me not to make a big deal of it. I just want a low-key night with some close friends, she said. No surprises, no fuss. Just you, me, and a few people. At the time, I felt relieved. We'd been distant, and I thought maybe this would be the reset we needed. She hosted it at a short-term rental, said it was a client's property she had access to for staging. It was a nice place, tucked back near a lake, not far from where we used to kayak in the early days. She called it nostalgic. I called it a chance. I remember pulling into the gravel driveway and seeing more cars than I expected. Just a few people, she said, but it was more like 20. The music was already playing. Her drink was already half gone, and she was wearing that green dress, the one she hadn't worn in years because she said it made her feel too noticed. I should have left the moment I saw how comfortable she was without me. I spent the evening mostly on the porch, sipping warm soda and making small talk with people who barely looked at me when they answered. No one asked about work. No one asked how I'd been. It was like I wasn't even there for her birthday. I was just there to fill space. Then, at some point past midnight, she disappeared. Not in a dramatic way, just a subtle fade from the crowd. I asked around. Bathroom, someone said. Changing her shoes, said someone else. I waited another 30 minutes before I went looking. The rental had 2 floors. I crept up the stairs and found the hallway dark. One door was cracked open. I reached for it, and that's when I heard her laugh. Not her fake social laugh. The real one. The one I used to earn. I didn't go in. I couldn't. I backed away, like if I didn't see it, it wouldn't be real. That night, when we got home, she collapsed into bed like nothing happened. I remember brushing her hair back from her face while she slept. She looked so peaceful, and I hated how much I still loved her. Now, months later, I went searching through our cloud storage. She always took photos at events, always uploaded everything. If this party was a cover, maybe she left a crack in the mask. And she had. Buried deep in a shared drive she clearly forgot I had access to. I found a hidden folder labeled Staging Portfolio. Inside were photos. Dozens. Most were exactly what you'd expect. Couches, lighting setups, before and after room shots. But tucked between photos of dining tables and empty bedrooms were pictures from the party. One photo stopped me cold. It was a group shot, 5 people sitting on the balcony couch. Darla in the middle, glass of wine in hand, that green dress wrinkled around her knees. And right next to her, half shielded by someone's arm, was a woman I'd never seen before. A woman with long black hair, looking away from the camera. Tattoo of a feather on her collarbone. Labeled beneath the image, Cora, B-Day Setup Night. I stared at that name until my eyes blurred. It wasn't a nickname. It wasn't a slip. It was her. The missing piece. And suddenly I realized, this wasn't just about one affair. This wasn't just one guy. This was something wider. Older. Deeper. I didn't know who Cora was to Darla. But the way her name came from that letter, the way she was quietly present at a night meant to celebrate my wife, it told me everything I needed to know. Cora wasn't a side note. She was the author. I didn't sleep that night. I drove to the rental property at dawn, hoping the place was still listed. It wasn't. The listing was gone. Scrubbed. But I wasn't done. I knew one thing. Cora had been there, and someone, maybe more than one person, didn't want me to remember. But I remembered. And now I had a new question. Who was protecting her? There's something eerie about opening old inboxes. It feels like walking through a dead mall, where music still plays through dusty speakers. Half-forgotten logins. Outdated passwords. And yet, that's where the truth was hiding. Not in the present, but buried in the stale digital trail of the past. I couldn't sleep after finding that photo of Cora. Her face might have been turned away, but the way Darla leaned toward her in the picture said enough. It wasn't polite. It wasn't casual. It was familiar. Like Cora wasn't just a guest, she was something else. And the label under that photo didn't just identify her. It marked her. So I went back into our shared Gmail archive. Years worth of messages. Darla never cleaned it out. She preferred to leave things sitting in limbo, half deleted but still recoverable. And maybe I was counting on that. I knew the party had been staged at a rental she claimed was for a client. So I searched the name she gave me back then, Willoughby Interiors. Only a few messages popped up. One was a forwarded invoice, but another stood out. An old, unopened message from February 2019 with the subject line, Room Access, Personal Entry Approval. I clicked it. It was from a private rental agency, not Airbnb, not anything public. Just a custom domain I didn't recognize, and a short message inside. Your guest Cora Langley has been added to the private key list. The code will reset after 14 days. You are now responsible for any overnight guests per contract terms. Additional logs available upon request. Attached was a digital key, long expired, and a calendar invite dated nearly 5 years ago. I read the name over and over again. Cora Langley. Now she had a full name. And a history. My heart pounded as I copied that name and started digging. Private searches, old social media, business listings. I wasn't sure what I was even looking for. I just knew if I followed this thread far enough, something would snap. I found her within minutes. Or, more accurately, I found pieces of her. A deactivated profile on a platform called Bloomify. A headshot from a consulting panel in 2021 listed under lifestyle mentors and empowerment coaches. And then, at the bottom of a cached blog post from a self-help site I'd never heard of, I saw it. Special thanks to my longtime muse and creative partner, Darla W., who taught me the real meaning of transformation. I nearly dropped my laptop. Darla, not just a friend, not just a secret, a partner. There had been no men in 2019. No hotel rooms. No suspicious coworkers. There was Cora. Everything twisted sideways in that moment. I felt like I'd been chasing the wrong villain this entire time. My wife hadn't just been sneaking around with someone new. She'd built an entire hidden chapter of her life and left me on the first page. I went back through our calendar app. Old events. Client meetings. Spa appointments. I found more references to CL sessions in 2020 and 2021. Initials that meant nothing to me before. Now, every one of them glowed like a red alert. Cora Langley hadn't vanished. She had just evolved into a ghost my wife kept feeding. I needed confirmation. So I did something desperate. I messaged her. Not Darla. Cora. I found a contact email tied to her old domain. It was inactive, but still routed to a catch-all inbox. I wrote just 2 lines. You were mentioned in a letter. Why did you come back? I didn't expect a reply, but 4 hours later, I got one. And all it said was, I never left. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about one betrayal. It wasn't even about 2 people. It was a network. A deliberately hidden, carefully protected tangle of secrets and years-long deception. One that involved more than I could have ever imagined. And at the center of it wasn't just Darla. It was me. Because the next email I received had an attachment. A video. And it started with my name. I stared at the email for 15 minutes before I clicked the video. The message was just one sentence, typed in a default sans serif font like it was nothing special, like it wasn't about to upend the last of what I still believed. He deserves to see it the way we saw him. That line lived in my chest like a punch I couldn't duck. The file name was meaningless, just a string of numbers, no hint of context. It wasn't long. 2 minutes and 23 seconds. I almost deleted it without watching. Almost. But the part of me that still needed to understand, that voice inside me that hadn't died yet, just curled up in the corner, said, you already lost everything. What else is there to break? I hit play. The footage wasn't shot on a phone. It was from a mounted camera, high angle, clean audio. A living room. Not mine. Probably a rental. Maybe one of the places they used under the staging business. I didn't recognize the furniture, but I recognized her. Darla sat cross-legged on a couch, holding a glass of red wine, laughing. Beside her was Cora, legs tucked under her, smirking like she knew something the rest of the world didn't. Then a third figure entered frame. It was me. I couldn't understand. It was a clip from 2 years ago, when Darla convinced me to join her on a client weekend retreat. I remembered that trip, or thought I did. I thought I had fun. I thought she brought me there because we were reconnecting. In the video, I was smiling, holding a book. I made some dumb joke about the property's no pet policy, and they laughed. At least, I thought they did. Watching it now, their laughter was different. Less with more at. Then Cora leaned into Darla's ear and whispered something. The audio caught it. You sure he doesn't suspect anything? Darla responded without hesitation. Clancy thinks I'm trying to save the marriage. He'll say yes to anything right now. I felt my stomach tighten. The version of me in the video was still smiling, still joking, still believing he mattered. It was unbearable to watch. I paused it, rewound, listened again. Then came the worst part. Cora looked into the camera, straight into it, and said, "What if he finds out it started with you and me?" I stopped breathing. My eyes burned. I always assumed the man at the bistro, that smug, wine-sipping shadow, was the beginning of the betrayal. A recent wound. But that was just the surface. This video proved it had started years ago. Before the restaurant. Before the motel. Before I even knew who Cora was. It was never just about him. He was a distraction. A screen to keep me from digging too deep. From realizing the true betrayal wasn't some sudden affair. It was a relationship my wife had been cultivating in parallel to our marriage. Carefully. Proudly. With someone she never once admitted existed in her world. And I had been brought into their space like a prop. Like a joke. When the video ended, I sat perfectly still for a long time. The kind of still where even your bones feel like they've stopped trying. My reflection in the blank screen looked unfamiliar, slack-faced, eyes wide, like I had fallen through myself. I didn't cry. Not yet. I opened my messages and typed a single question to Darla. How long have you and Cora been laughing at me? She read it instantly. No typing dots. No reply. And then she blocked me. Just like that. The woman I married. The woman who wore my ring. The woman who used my love as a shield to hide something far older and colder than I ever suspected, vanished with a click. But she didn't erase everything. Because the next morning, someone knocked on my door. A woman in a gray coat. She looked nervous. And the first words out of her mouth were, "You don't know me, but I used to work for Cora. I think she's watching you." The woman at my door was younger than I expected. Late 20s maybe. But her face looked tired in a way that didn't come from sleep deprivation. It was the kind of tired people wore when they'd been keeping secrets too long. She didn't smile. She didn't introduce herself. She just stepped back slightly and said, "I promise I'm not here to hurt you. But you deserve to know what she's doing." I didn't even ask who she was. I already knew. Cora. I let her in. Against every instinct. I opened the door wider and stood back, half expecting her to bolt. But she didn't. She walked inside slowly, like she wasn't sure she wanted to do this after all. She sat at the edge of the couch and looked around my living room like it was a museum of something extinct. Then she said her name. Lena. She used to work for Cora Langley as an assistant, she told me. 2 years ago. She handled bookings, workshops, personal meetings, digital content. Cora ran her little empire like a lifestyle cult, self-empowerment, boundary setting, radical truth, all wrapped in designer yoga wear and vague Instagram captions about unapologetic wholeness. She's brilliant, Lena admitted. But she's cruel. She doesn't use people the way most people do. She studies them. Like experiments. Like projects. Then she took something out of her coat. A small flash drive. She placed it on my coffee table and slid it toward me. She kept copies of everything. Footage. Messages. Even voice memos. This isn't all of it. But I made backups before I left. I picked it up with shaking hands. It felt like holding a detonator. I didn't even know what questions to ask. But Lena wasn't finished. She talks about you, Clancy. She's talked about you for years. Not just as Darla's husband. As a concept. An example. I stared at her. Example of what? She didn't blink. Of someone who could be slowly erased without realizing it. She called it emotional exsanguination. Like draining someone's emotional blood until they can't even recognize they're bleeding. I didn't move. She didn't just seduce your wife. She dismantled her. Rewired her. She told Darla she was going to turn you into a ghost so cleanly, you'd vanish without leaving a mess. I felt the air go thin. I stood up, stepped away. My chest tightened, not in panic, but in grief. Not just for the marriage, not just for the betrayal, but for the deliberateness of it all. The weaponization of trust. The use of my patience and softness as clay in someone else's experiment. I think she's planning to publish it, Lena continued. Not your name, but the story. She's been crafting this whole thing, about the unawakened partner. She's calling it the quiet exit. That broke something in me. The quiet exit. That's what she called me. A man who never raised his voice. Who never slammed a door. who slipped out of his own marriage like a shadow under the frame. Lena reached into her coat again and handed me something else, a printed photograph. Not a recent one. It was Darla and Cora at an event, laughing in front of a backdrop with some sponsor logos. But what shook me was the detail in the corner. A man, blurry, half out of frame, holding a drink, looking at them with tired eyes. Me. It was from the retreat in 2021, the one I barely remember. They'd taken that photo while I was standing there. Clancy, Lena said gently, this wasn't just cheating. This was documentation. You were included, not as a victim, as a subject. I couldn't stay in the room. I went outside, breathing like I'd run a mile. I leaned against the porch railing, trying to wrap my mind around the fact that I hadn't just been betrayed. I'd been observed, measured, noticed, not for who I was, but for how effectively I could be erased. When I came back inside, Lena was still there, silent. What do I do with this? I asked, lifting the flash drive. She didn't answer right away. Then she said something I didn't expect. You could expose her. You could show the world what she is. Or, she paused, you could end it in a way she didn't design. Take the ending back. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because the thing about being watched is, once you know it's happening, you stop acting. You start planning. I didn't open the flash drive that night. Not because I was afraid of what I'd see. I already knew enough. It wasn't going to be more affairs or more cruel whispers. It would be more of me, confused, passive, unaware, captured like a case study in someone else's thesis. And I'd had enough of being a participant in someone else's story. Instead, I went into the closet and pulled out the last box of old photos I hadn't touched in years. Darla and I during our first apartment move. A blurry selfie on a canoe in Maine. Her birthday dinner at that diner with a neon jukebox that played the same 5 songs on a loop. I used to think these moments were sacred. Now I understood they were just chapters I'd been afraid to close. That night, I packed everything. I didn't destroy anything. I didn't post revenge stories. I didn't send exposés or emails to the world. I simply took my name back. My time. My choices. I emptied our shared accounts, legally, my portion, and booked a 3-month stay in a small town out west I'd always dreamed of visiting, but never had the right timing for. Funny how betrayal frees up your schedule. I left Darla a note. No drama. No anger. Just a folded piece of paper on the kitchen table that read, "You built an ending for me, but I'm writing my own now." She never responded. I think that bothered her more than anything I could have done. The most surprising thing? After I left, I didn't feel hollow. I didn't feel rage. I felt calm, like stepping out of a noisy building into snowfall. I found a cabin, started hiking, met people who didn't ask about my past but cared about my present. I began sleeping again, laughing again, not because I was healing fast, but because I'd finally stopped being someone else's mirror. Lena and I stayed in touch, not romantically, just as survivors of the same storm. She eventually opened her own small design business. We talk sometimes. Her emails feel like postcards from another life. Warm, human, free. Cora? I don't know what happened to her project. Maybe she still wrote The Quiet Exit. Maybe she turned me into a metaphor for emotional detachment. Let her. I'm not the man in her book anymore. I'm not the ghost in the frame. I'm here, living, breathing, real. And this time, no one gets to write my ending but me. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you've ever been through something like this, where you realized someone you trusted wasn't just unfaithful but manipulative, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment and share one moment that made you stop, look around, and decide you deserved more. You're not alone, and you're stronger than they counted on. This has been Reddit Confessions, where the quietest voices often carry the loudest truths. Until next time, stay real, stay awake, stay you.